The sun drifted slowly behind the Bitterroot Mountains, its final rays falling into the deep forest, like golden threads flickering between shadows. The thin light of day's end no longer held warmth, only cold weaving through the treetops, and a stillness so deep one could hear the beat of their own heart in their chest. But in the forest, silence is never safe. It is often the moment when the most dangerous things are lurking in the dark. And then a hoarse whimper tore through the quiet. Not a growl, not a threat, but a cry for help, fragile, choked, lost. At the foot of a pine-covered slope, a lioness emerged, staggering as if every step was a sentence. Her chest heaved, eyes bloodshot with panic and exhaustion. Her body did not belong to this place, filthy, emaciated, ragged, as though she had crossed a world made only of pain. Behind her was a lion cub, soaked in matted golden fur, softly whimpering each breath, like wind brushing over ash. And in front of them stood Dusk, a massive gray grizzly, towering like the shadow of the mountain itself. He stood motionless, as if the ancient forest had shaped him from stone and thunder. The last sunlight brushed across his shoulders, forming a strange halo like a twilight sentinel god. Every law of nature dictated that this encounter should end in blood. Lions and bears do not share territory, do not share life. But what happened next, no one, not even nature, could explain. The lioness didn't roar, didn't retreat, didn't protect her cub with the desperate savagery of a mother. She lowered her head and began to crawl. Not a defensive move, but a gesture of surrender, as if she understood the creature before her could be the final salvation, or the final sentence. Her whole body trembled. Her legs collapsed as if they had no bones left. But still, she crawled toward Dusk, toward a being who could snatch away her life and her cubs at any moment. She didn't know who he was. She only knew before her stood a gate, a chance, a choice. And Dusk, he didn't move, didn't growl, didn't threaten. He only stood there, eyes as deep as a midnight lake, watching the impossible unfold, a mother lion begging for mercy, not with claws, but with every ounce of weakness left in her heart. A plea for mercy at twilight, in the forest between instinct and something greater than instinct. And it was only the beginning. Dusk stood still, unmoving, as if he had long since shed the instinct to hunt. The gray bear was unlike any bear ever recorded in ranger logs. He didn't mark territory, never raided bird nests, didn't harm the small or the weak, even when hungry. Dusk, the name given by the rangers, meant twilight because he only ever appeared when the day was about to end. And like twilight itself, Dusk always remained on the boundary, not quite light, not quite darkness. Local rangers whispered of Dusk as a living legend. Some claimed to have seen him standing amidst the morning fog, watching a herd of deer pass. He didn't chase, didn't growl. He just stood there. Along both sides of his body ran long, red scars, traces from unknown origins, fights with other bears, animal traps, or perhaps from days when he had once been merciless. No one knew for sure. Only that Dusk had survived it all. But seemingly in exchange for something else, a kind of silence laced with humanity. That evening, Dusk had not set out in search of food. He was merely wandering through the tall pine forest, where the wind whispered through the needles like the voice of the earth itself. There was no scent of blood, no sign of territorial intrusion, only a piercing cry from a creature that didn't belong in this place that made Dusk stop. Another bear might have ignored it or seen it as an opportunity. But Dusk did not stop, because it was the sound of prey. He stopped because it was the sound of pain, a sound so raw it made the entire forest go still. At the foot of the hill, when Dusk first saw the lioness, she was not a predator. She was a fugitive. Her dark coat was matted with mud and dried blood. Her eyes wide with panic, as if everything around her was a recurring nightmare. Where had she come from? The truth, as rangers would later conclude, was that she had once been held in captivity. A private facility specializing in importing wild animals for tourism had gone bankrupt. She and her cub had somehow escaped, or had been left behind. She had no survival skills, didn't know how to hunt, didn't know how to claw trees, couldn't tell venomous snakes from clean water sources. But she knew fear, and she knew love. Motherly instinct was the strongest of all, stronger even than survival itself. And that day that love had compelled her to crawl to the feet of the gray bear, the only creature in the forest who could either end or redeem them. Dusk stared at her for a long time, a gaze beyond interpretation. He could smell death rising from the cub, perhaps snake venom or some infection. He could smell exhaustion and despair from the mother, the scent of a being who no longer had the strength to resist. And he smelled something else, a scent that foretold a decision about to be made. Not a decision of instinct, but of will. And when the sun finally disappeared, when darkness cloaked all three creatures within that small space of wilderness, vast and wild, Dusk did not walk away. The forest sank into the final faint violet light of the day. No more birdsong, no more rustling leaves, only a single sound echoed through the soul of anyone who had ever heard it. The ragged breathing of a mother about to lose her child. The lioness lay flat against the ground, her once powerful body now reduced to a gaunt back, pressed tight to the earth. Each time she tried to lift her head, a moan escaped from deep within her throat. Not a roar of a predator, but the sob of a creature pleading for something it did not fully understand. She had reached the end of instinct where pride gives way to desperation. Beneath the damp canopy, the lion cub lay motionless, eyes fixed on its mother, occasionally twitching, as if the cold itself was clawing at what little life remained. A faint swelling on its tiny leg sign of venom or infection was spreading through its bloodstream. Every attempt to lift its head ended in failure, the neck limp collapsing again. The lioness turned back, panting heavily. Then, she did something no predator had ever done before a creature 3 times her size. She crawled toward Dusk, not stalking, not sneaking, not keeping a distance. She lowered her head, deep body pressed to the ground, as if offering herself to some ancient god. Her whole body trembled, claws curled inward, ears flattened. No sound, only raw surrender. She didn't look Dusk in the eyes because sometimes the weaker creature doesn't need to see. It just needs to hope. Dusk remained where he was stone-like. The first wind of night swept through, carrying the damp scent of a coming storm. Overhead, a red-tailed hawk circled, then sliced westward through the sky as if heralding something near. The lioness stayed, bowed her breath, now shallow and fast, as if she was pouring the very last of her strength into holding herself together. The lion cub whimpered a faint broken sound, and Dusk stepped forward. He did not growl, did not lunge. Just one step, heavy, bearing the weight of the forest of legend of fate. His massive paw landed right beside the cub, remarkably gently, as if the forest itself was taking care not to snap a single leaf. The lioness recoiled instinctively, but didn't flee. She had made her choice. He lowered his head. His damp black nose touched the soft belly fur of the cub. He sniffed long and deep, sensing the life flickering second by second. Then he looked up straight into the lioness's eyes. That moment no one could explain. No scientist, no ranger, no camera could decode the look Dusk gave her. It wasn't the gaze of a beast, nor of a king of the wild, but of a soul that had once known loss, standing before another soul about to lose everything. And then Dusk sat down, not to rest, but to guard. He never took his eyes off the cub. No claws raised, no roar sounded, just the presence of a silent wall standing between a fading life and the world beyond, full of things that would steal it away. The lioness, stunned, crept slowly closer, nuzzled her cub's belly, and let out a soft, aching moan. And beside her, Dusk, the lone gray bear of the ancient woods, became the only torch still burning in the darkness, keeping hope alive. The sky had gone completely dark. Night swallowed the final fragments of daylight, leaving only the flickering glow of stars, obscured by thick clouds rolling in. The storm was drawing near. The lioness curled herself around her cub, her soaked body trembling with every gust of wind, slicing through the leaves. But she was no longer alone. Beside her, Dusk still sat like a living statue carved from forest stone and the breath of thunder. He did not leave. He did not close his eyes. A silent guardian, not out of duty, not out of instinct, but for reasons no one could truly understand. Then, suddenly, Dusk stood. The lioness let out a low growl, not to threaten, but out of fear. Would he leave? Would the fragile hope she had clung to vanish like morning mist? But Dusk didn't run. He walked into the forest, slowly, purposefully. The wind screamed through the pine branches, slashing at his body like the storm's knives. But he didn't stop. Nearly half an hour later, as thunder cracked across the distant hills, Dusk returned. In his jaws was a bundle of wet roots. Not pine needles, not random branches, but a type of root. Local rangers once called survival root, a rare wild plant rooted in indigenous legend, angelica, or perhaps wild ginseng. One of the most potent natural remedies known to reduce inflammation, draw out venom, and heal. Bears and wild wolves had long been seen instinctively using it to treat bites or infection. Dusk dropped the roots onto the ground, right next to the lion cub. He didn't eat them. He didn't tear them apart. He placed them down gently, almost as if he knew they carried a chance. The lioness didn't understand, but she didn't react with suspicion. She simply watched, then leaned forward, nose stretching toward the roots, and sniffed. A pungent, peppery scent spread outward, seeping into the damp leaves beneath them. Dusk sat again. No words, no urging, just waiting. Perhaps he had once bitten into those same roots during a fevered wilderness. Perhaps those very plants had saved him from death when humankind had left him behind. Or perhaps Dusk couldn't explain what he was doing, other than trusting in something beyond fear. Above, the storm broke loose. Rain fell like blades slashing against the cracked earth, howling through tree trunks like a scream. Other animals fled for shelter. But Dusk did not step back. He stood soaked to the bone shoulders, shaking under the force of the wind, still a wall between the two fallen beings and the rest of the savage world. He lowered his head, breathing deeply, and waited again. And then, it seemed, the roots began to take effect. The lion cub twitched. Its tiny frame jerked just slightly, not from approaching death, but from life returning. The lioness licked her cub's forehead. Her eyes turned to Dusk, not with fear now, but with something else. Gratitude. Deep, and full. That night, a storm ripped through the forest, but it could not tear apart what was beginning to grow between the three creatures. Not instinct, not survival of the fittest, but compassion lit from a place far beyond instinct. Night fell over the forest like a morning shroud. The wind howled through the canopy, carrying the distant roars of a wilderness in rage. Rain poured in torrents, each drop pounding the earth, sweeping away leaves, soil, and the last fragile threads of hope. The lioness lay curled around her cub, her frail body trembling from cold and rain. Though they had eaten a few slices of the root Dusk had brought back, the cub's survival still hung in uncertainty. But the only thing she knew, it was still breathing. Dusk, still standing guard like a living mountain, had not closed his eyes. A bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating for an instant a scene no one could ever forget. The massive gray bear, soaked to the bone, his heavy breath rumbling, stood between the storm and the two creatures lying low beneath it. And then they came. Wolves. At first, just a flicker of shadow at the forest's edge, low, quick, silent save for damp breath and hunger. Then another, and another. A gray pack, phantoms of the night, gathering in the rain's shadow. They did not howl. They didn't need to. They were testing boundaries, what was lying exposed in the cold, wet forest, vulnerable, tender, and didn't belong here. And in front of it, just one bear. Big, yes, but injured. The blood on Dusk's shoulder had mixed with the rain, sending a scent wolves could detect from miles away. A young wolf stepped forward. Its eyes gleamed silver in the night, its jaws parted slightly, teeth glinting. It wasn't afraid. Hunger made wild things show reckless. Dusk didn't back down. He simply lowered his head, tensed his shoulders. A growl thundered from his chest, not out of rage, but as a warning. The forest trembled with the sound, as if even the stones knew to be afraid. The young wolf stopped, but didn't retreat. A rustle from the left, then the right. The whole pack had formed a circle. They weren't here for a challenge. They were here to survive. And survival in the forest sometimes meant killing whatever was weaker. They saw the lion cub, frail, scented of illness, blood, and milk. They saw the lioness, too weak to fight. And then they saw Dusk, a barrier, a warrior, a target. The lioness sprang up. She hissed paws, slipping in the mud. But she couldn't hold herself. She collapsed again. Teeth clenched. She had nothing left but her heart. Dusk looked at her. A very brief glance. Then he turned, faced the wolves, and stepped out from under the sheltering branches. He walked into the storm, into the wolves, into the thin line between life and death. Alone. Not for territory, not for pain, not for instinct, but for something greater than all three combined. And then, war broke out. One wolf lunged. Dusk roared and moved like thunder. One swipe sent the wolf crashing into the mud as if struck by lightning. But the others didn't fear. They charged 4 directions, biting, dragging, testing strength. Dusk spun like a storm, made of fur and claws. Blood flew not only wolf's, but bear's. One clamped onto Dusk's shoulder. He roared, flinging it off, but its teeth left a gash so deep it touched bone. Rain poured like waterfalls. The forest screamed. The lioness howled until her voice broke. But no one heard except the storm itself. Dusk slowed. He trembled from pain. His legs dragged, one front paw nearly useless. But his eyes blazed. He took another step, and roared a roar not meant for the woods, but for life. And the wolves stopped, not from fear, but from belief that this creature would not die easily. This creature would kill to protect, even if wounded. Even as the dark closed in, Dusk would not retreat. One by one, the wolves backed away, slowly, teeth bared, growling, but retreating, then vanishing into the mist of night. Dusk turned back. He didn't raise his head like a victor. He dragged his body. Blood trailed behind every step. The lioness crawled over. She licked the wound on his shoulder. He let out a low moan, soft, then sat beside the mother and cub. In silence. The rain began to ease. Thunder faded. The sky pulled back, leaving behind a silence so deep one could hear the steady breaths of the lion cub as it slept. The first light of dawn crept timidly through the soaked forest canopy. It wasn't brilliant nor golden, just a smudged shade of pink, like the gaze of someone waking from a nightmare. On the sodden forest floor, blood had already mixed with mud, spreading into dark, heavy rings. Leaves lay scattered, crushed. The whole forest looked as if it had just witnessed a battle from a fairy tale, one no one was certain was real. Except Jake. He was a seasoned ranger, 17 years patrolling the Bitterroot forests. He knew every bear track, every type of wolf howl, every tree's slant in the wind. But this morning, he felt like a stranger here. Jake appeared quietly stepping over broken pine trunks, his boots caked in mud eyes, scanning for every unusual trace. A local resident had called the night before I heard. Screaming. Not human, but not wolf either. Like someone fighting, not to disappear. Jake had thought it was a bear's roar, or maybe a mountain lion straying near the forest's edge. But then, footprints tangled with blood, deep claw marks in tree trunks, and the smell. A smell he could never mistake the scent of life and death. He snapped off a dry pine branch, brushed away the undergrowth, and stepped into a clearing. He froze. No more than 30 paces away, a massive gray bear covered in blood shoulder-torn fur, matted with rain and mud. A lioness pressed tightly against the bear's side, fragile as a leaf barely surviving a storm. And between two creatures who should have been mortal enemies, lay a sleeping lion cub. Jake stiffened. His training instincts screamed in his head. Danger. Back away. Call for backup. Ready the tranquilizer. His hand reached for the gun strapped behind his back, but he didn't draw it. Because in that moment, Dusk looked up. Bear eyes met human eyes. There was no threat, no rage, only a deep, weary stillness and something almost human. Jake held his breath. What he saw in those eyes wasn't just pain. It was awareness, acceptance, and something he never believed could exist, compassion. The lioness opened her eyes slightly, sensing the presence of a human. Her ear twitched, but she didn't growl, didn't run. She simply watched. Jake lowered his hand from the gun. He sat down, didn't speak, didn't come closer. He just observed. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine resin, mud, and blood. Jake saw Dusk close his eyes again. And then a strange thing happened. The massive bear shifted slightly, groaning softly in pain, but still reached out with his snout and gently nudged forward a rusty metal bowl filled with collected rainwater toward the lion cub. The lioness leaned down and licked her cub's ear. It stirred, opened its eyes, and began to drink. Jake couldn't breathe. He had seen bears tear apart a deer in seconds. He had watched mountain lions fight to the death just to protect a scrap of hunting ground. But never had a gray bear become a guardian, and never had a lioness trusted it as if it were her own blood. Jake quietly pulled out his satellite phone. He didn't call for reinforcements, didn't issue an emergency report. He simply dialed the mobile vet team and whispered as if speaking to something sacred, "I need you to come here, but not to capture, only to witness, and bring food, clean water. Because I think they're taking care of each other." 2 hours after Jake whispered into the satellite phone, the Bitterroot Wildlife Reserve's mobile medical team arrived on the outskirts of the pine forest, where Dusk and the Lioness with her cub had taken refuge. Dr. Lisa Firth, the head of conservation known for her stone-solid decisions, was the first to step down from the helicopter. She wore a khaki jacket ranger badge neatly clipped in place, but her eyes were cold as steel. She looked at Jake. "We're talking about an adult grizzly bear wounded near a lioness and her cub. There's no way they're not attacking each other unless you saw wrong." Jake didn't argue. He simply handed her the binoculars. Lisa looked through them. It took her 30 seconds to say anything. Dusk still lying on his side, breathing heavily, one shoulder soaked in blood, half asleep. The lioness resting her head on the bear's stomach. The lion cub just waking from a nap, peacefully chewing on a piece of soft, rotted root. All three, like a strange family in a land not meant for gentleness. Lisa lowered the binoculars, her voice as soft as wind brushing through pine needles. "They're living together." Jake nodded. Lisa said, "That's impossible. Biology doesn't allow it." Jake simply replied, "But the forest does." A group of medics, biologists, and rangers gathered beneath a large tree. One by one, they spoke up. "We can't let a bear and a lion sleep side by side. That's a risk. The lioness is weak. We could separate her and bring her to a safe care facility. The bear is severely injured. There's a risk of infection. This is an exceptional case, but if we leave them alone, there's a high chance all three might die." Then Jake said something that silenced them all. "I was there. I saw the bear give water to the cub. He protected them from a pack of wolves with his own blood. Are you so sure that separating them would be better? For any of them?" Lisa fell silent. She looked again at the photo Jake had taken with his old phone. Dusk and the lioness lying beneath a tree, their foreheads touching dawn's light, reflected in both their eyes. A tenderness that couldn't be argued with. Finally, she looked up. "We do nothing. No tranquilizers, no cages, no relocations, no decisions made for them. We wait." The veterinary team moved camp to half a kilometer from the site. They pitched tents, set up binoculars, cameras, and brought clean water and food to place at the edge of the canopy. Not a single person stepped into the boundary of the three creatures. For the first time in the reserve's history, humans chose to observe rather than control. That afternoon, as the last golden light of day spilled over the fallen leaves, Lisa Firth wrote in the conservation logbook something never found in any textbook. Intervention paused. Status stable, duration unknown. Recommendation, behavioral observation. Private note. 3 species. 2 predatory instincts. 1 patch of forest. No conflict. Maybe. Nature is testing a new kind of alliance. 2 days had passed since the storm. The entire reserve seemed to hold its breath, as if afraid to shatter the fragile moment blooming in the woods. In a small patch of forest deep within Bitterroot, where no chains or leashes ever touched the ground, something strange was quietly growing life and trust. Dusk was still badly injured. The deep bite on his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the smell of swelling and infection still lingered in the air. He moved with effort, each step a struggle. But not once did he leave the radius surrounding the Lioness and her cub. When the cub stirred, Dusk would drag himself closer. When the wind picked up, he would turn his back to shield them from the chill of night. He didn't roar. He didn't growl. He only sighed like a giant old man who knew he had made the right choice, even if it hurt. The Lioness recovered slowly, but the light had returned to her eyes. At first, she flinched at every sound, every snapping branch, a haunting echo of nightmares. But each time she startled, Dusk would lift his head and look at her as if to remind her, "I'm still here." When the bear slept, she would lick the wound on his shoulder softly, carefully, as if afraid to hurt him. Jake, watching from a distance, saw it all and was left speechless. The cub was the reason it all began, and now it was the quiet heartbeat tying the two largest creatures in the forest together. The cub was standing. It had taken a few steps. Each time it moved, Dusk tilted his head, watching like a father seeing his child walk for the first time. Each time it stumbled, its mother would lick its forehead, and sometimes Dusk would gently nudge it upright with his nose. Once the cub dragged a dry pine cone over and placed it at Dusk's feet like a gift. Dusk didn't understand, but he kept it by his side all night. Jake never left camp. He slept at the edge of the forest, recording every behavior, every gesture. In his old notebook, there was a line messy but honest. Bear tilts head when cub sleeps. Lioness lets bear rest muzzle on her neck. They breathe in sync. He gave the phenomenon a name, non-instinctual bonding. But deep down, Jake knew this wasn't something you could name. This was something you simply had to protect. Dr. Lisa Firth, once a firm advocate of separate first treat, later now stood at a distance, eyes filled with questions. She didn't rush to draft a plan. She didn't propose a separation. Because something inside her had begun to shift if the bear chooses to shield instead of shred. If the Lioness chooses to lick his wounds rather than protect her cub from him, then maybe instinct isn't the limit. On the fourth morning after the storm, the sun had yet to pierce through the thick fog clinging to the rain-soaked canopy. But even the mist couldn't drown out the rhythmic clatter of a small helicopter descending onto the edge of Bitterroot Forest. The first person to step down didn't wear boots. She carried policy. Her name was Miriam Lawton, Regional Executive Director for the Pacific Northwest at the National Wildlife Protection Agency. She wore a pale blue shirt, a gray tie, and a face not built for tenderness. Lisa Firth stood waiting. The early wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't back down. Miriam approached, voice clipped and direct. "I saw the footage. I read the report. And I don't believe it." Lisa remained calm. "We documented their behavior thoroughly. There's been no predatory aggression between them." Miriam frowned. "You're letting an exotic predator, a lioness, roam free alongside a native grizzly bear in an area where humans still go camping. And instead of intervening, you choose to—" "Wait," Lisa didn't answer right away. She turned and gestured toward the forest. "Would you like to see for yourself?" They walked through the woods, the ground still scarred with signs of the storm. When they reached the edge of the pines, everyone fell silent. Dusk resting beneath a tree, half asleep. The Lioness curled against his shoulder, one paw draped over his neck in a mark of trust. The cub playing with a dry leaf, unbothered and unafraid. Miriam lowered her binoculars. For the first time, she had no answer. Not because she lacked words, but because something unfamiliar stirred inside her doubt in the absolutes she had once trusted. That afternoon, Miriam made a call to headquarters in Washington. She stood apart from the camp, her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but because she didn't know what to report. The voice on the other end was cold and firm, like static on an old radio. You need to separate them. Immediately. If there's any risk of disease, behavioral anomalies, or simply the chance the public finds out we'll be slaughtered in the press. Miriam looked toward the woods. Only silence answered her. That evening, Lisa entered the temporary ranger tent and placed a piece of paper on Miriam's desk. Jake's handwriting rough but clear. No signs of conflict. Grizzly Dusk nudged water toward the lion cub. Lioness has accepted the bear as part of her group. Recommendation: continue observation. No intervention. They don't need rescuing. They need to be left alone. Lisa spoke softly without pressure. I used to believe in boundaries, but Dusk taught me that sometimes a boundary is just a fear we haven't yet understood. Miriam said nothing. She picked up a pen and signed. And so for the first time in Bitterroot's history, an official decision was made not based on protocol, but on trust. Trust that nature, when left unforced, could rewrite its own story of survival. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the towering pines like the final brushstrokes on a wild, unfinished painting. Jake sat about 30 meters from the central clearing, binoculars, resting on his knees, notebook in hand. The silence of the forest wasn't unsettling anymore. It was solemn, like a melody that no longer needed music. And then something extraordinary happened. She stood up, slowly. Her legs steadier now, her steps no longer trembling. The cub lifted its head, then rose to follow, tottering gently behind. Dusk, the grizzly who had once risked everything to shield them, remained lying still, head resting on a gnarled root. But then, the lioness turned to look at Dusk, a long, lingering gaze. No roar, no growl, just a silence that Jake would later describe as like an invitation not spoken, but felt deep in the soul. Dusk rose, slowly, painfully, but he stood. And so 3 wild beings, 3 once lost souls, walked side by side through the forest. Jake immediately radioed Lisa Firth. Together they followed from a distance, careful not to be sensed. The 3 animals took a faint path through the woods, one unmarked on any map. They walked for about 20 minutes until they reached a natural fork, 3 fallen trees forming an arch above the splitting trails. Dusk was the first to stop. The lioness stood beside him. The cub trotted ahead a few playful steps into the divide. Lisa whispered, "They're deciding." The lioness sniffed the wind. She looked left the path that led to the open glade, where the reserve team could intervene. Then, right the deep woods, dark and far from any human trace. She didn't choose immediately. Instead, she licked Dusk's face, a gesture science would struggle to explain. A second passed, then another. And then she turned, guiding her cub westward toward the open clearing toward humans. Dusk didn't follow. He simply watched. No growl, no protest. Just a quiet gaze, like a father watching his child walk through the school gates for the very first time. Both Jake and Lisa found their eyes welling before they realized it. Jake murmured she chose to return. Lisa replied, her voice hoarse, not because she needed rescue, but because she believed we were no longer the threat. They stepped quietly to the crossing where Dusk still stood, watching them, unafraid, unmoving. Lisa slowly raised her hand. No weapon, no camera, just a woman speaking from her heart. Thank you. Dusk turned heading east, back into the shadows, into the forest's depths, leaving only paw prints and memory behind. Jake later wrote in his journal, Dusk didn't leave because he was abandoned. He left because he had done the one thing a loner can do. Taught a child that the world still holds kindness. That day, there were no chains, no tranquilizers, no humans handling the situation. There was only nature choosing separation through love. A family parted, but not shattered, because what they left in each other will never be lost. 2 weeks after the farewell deep in the forest, the lioness and her cub were brought to the Clearwater Wildlife Sanctuary, a large animal care center in western Montana. They were thoroughly examined. The vets confirmed the cub had miraculously survived a venomous snake bite thanks to time warmth and protection from the brutal elements. But that wasn't the only miracle. They gave him a temporary name, Ash. And from his very first day in the open enclosure, shared with 3 other lion cubs, Ash was different. He shared his food instead of fighting over it. He didn't bite or growl when bumped. He simply backed away and waited. When another cub injured its hind leg, Ash stopped playing. Instead, he lay beside it, gently licked the wound, and fell asleep there. Veterinarians, behaviorists, even Lisa Firth herself were baffled. How could a lion cub, one who had survived the wild, choose to protect instead of dominate? Then, one autumn day, a young deer accidentally wandered into the edge of the lion enclosure. It was injured blood seeping from its flank, likely from the wire fencing. Panic rippled through the sanctuary. Some staff reached for alarms. Others radioed the rescue team. But then Ash approached. Not to hunt, but to lie down beside the fawn. Just lay there. No growl, no sudden moves. Just a quiet gesture, as if he had seen this before. Jake, monitoring via the camera feed, sat frozen. He wrote in his notebook, Ash has seen this. When something weak couldn't run, there was one who didn't kill, but stood guard. Not his mother. The grizzly. Dusk. Jake began putting together a short film recounting the story no one believed. No animation. No dramatic music. Just a single shot of Ash resting his head on the wounded fawn. And a man's voice, someone who once believed nature existed only within boundaries. The series was titled, The Quiet Choice. In Nebraska, a 9-year-old boy named Elijah, nonverbal, afraid of animals, always hiding behind his mother at the park, watched Jake's video on a tablet. A week later, he begged his mom to take him to Clearwater Sanctuary. Not to see the tigers, not to photograph bears, but to sit quietly beneath the pine tree where the lioness once rested. And when his mother asked, "What do you see there?" Elijah smiled for the very first time in his life and whispered just one word, "Bear." The following winter, the grizzly bear's tracks disappeared from the edges of the sanctuary. Jake and the patrol team quietly accepted what everyone knew, but no one wanted to say out loud. Dusk was gone. No final roar, no body, no confirmation. Just one day, the tracks along the creek stopped, and from that day on, only silence remained. Months later, a motion-triggered camera set near the northern woods captured a blurry image, a massive bear silhouette wading slowly through a shallow stream in the dawn light. The photo was unclear. No visible face, no GPS data. All it showed was a hulking figure, slightly hunched with dark gray fur, soaked in mist. Jake didn't speak. He simply pinned the photo on the ranger station's bulletin board next to the first sheet of paper where someone had written the word mercy. On the photo he scrawled, "He's still out there. Somewhere." Ash grew fast, strong, powerful. Experts predicted he'd dominate the pride, become the alpha. But Ash never fought for dominance. When others roared, he stayed quiet. When a deer accidentally wandered into the enclosure, Ash didn't give chase. He lay beside it, then walked away. No one taught him that. He had simply once seen it in a grizzly named Dusk. Jake declined a promotion to stay in Bitterroot writing children's books. He taught, "We don't always have to be at the top of the food chain. Sometimes we should be the ones who step back and listen." Lisa Firth, once a firm believer in strict conservation law, wrote a groundbreaking report, "Observe before you intervene. When nature teaches us ethics." That proposal was approved by the federal government the following year, shifting wildlife response policy across the entire country. And the forest was never the same. Visitors began arriving at Clearwater Sanctuary, not to hear wild animals roar, but to walk a special trail leading to a clearing with no cages. At the heart of that open forest stood a small wooden sign, hand-carved, "Where the wild chose kindness." Above it, a small black iron statue, a bear mid-roar, not fierce, but proud in its silence. No one spoke loudly there. No one fed the animals. No one scattered flowers. People simply sat or walked quietly through, as if listening to something bigger than words. And Elijah, a living legacy. Elijah, the once nonverbal boy, was now 13. He told Dusk's story in children's nature classes. He spoke clearly. His eyes sparkled. When asked why he was no longer afraid of animals, Elijah smiled and said, "Because once a bear wasn't afraid of me." No one has seen Dusk since. No one knows if he's still alive. But in that old forest beneath the same pine trees where three creatures once shared a stormy night, something remains, a kind of silence so gentle. It moves even the human heart. If you believe that compassion knows no species, no boundaries, share this story. Because some legends don't need myths. They only need the belief that even in the wildest instincts, kindness can still be a choice.